My name is Jason, and I've always dreamed of learning English. For a long time, I watched people around me speaking English fluently, whether on TV, in movies, or even in real life. I used to think, how do they do it? Can I ever speak English like that? The idea of learning this new language seemed exciting, but also a little scary. There are many reasons why I want to learn English. First, I need it for my job. At work, many of my colleagues speak English, and sometimes they have meetings or read documents that are only in English. I don't want to feel left out or lost in those moments. If I can speak and understand English, I will be able to communicate with them better and even have more opportunities in my career. Another reason is for travel. I love to travel, and I've noticed that English is spoken in many places around the world. Whether it's in airports, hotels, or even restaurants, knowing English can make things so much easier. If I travel to another country, I want to be able to ask for directions, order food, or even make new friends without feeling shy or unsure. But most importantly, I want to learn English for myself. I believe that learning a new language can open new doors. It will give me access to more knowledge, like reading books in English or watching my favorite shows without subtitles. I want to feel confident and proud when I speak English, knowing that I took the time and effort to learn something new. So, here I am, ready to start my journey. I know it won't be easy, but I'm determined. I believe that with the right practice and patience, I can learn English step by step. This is my story of how I will learn and improve my English skills. I hope you join me on this journey. As I took my first step into learning English, I felt a mix of emotions. I was excited, no doubt. The thought of being able to speak and understand a whole new language gave me a sense of purpose. But, to be honest, I was also nervous, maybe even a little scared. Learning English felt like stepping into a big world, full of words I didn't understand, sounds I wasn't used to, and rules I hadn't heard before. It felt overwhelming. The first time I sat down with my English book, I remember feeling completely lost. I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. Some words looked familiar, but I didn't know what they meant. I wanted to dive in, but every time I tried, I found myself stuck. Where should I start? What should I learn first? Should I focus on vocabulary, grammar, or listening? These questions kept swirling around in my mind, and I wasn't sure what to do. The biggest challenge for me was my lack of confidence. Every time I tried to speak a new word, it felt wrong. I was afraid of making mistakes, of sounding silly, or of people laughing at me. Even when I practiced on my own, I doubted myself. I would say a sentence and then immediately think, did I say that correctly? Is that even the right word? I realized that the fear of making mistakes was holding me back. I knew I needed to let go of that fear, but it wasn't easy. Finding the right resources was another challenge. There were so many books, apps, and websites that promised to help me learn English, but I didn't know which ones were good for me. I tried using a dictionary, but it was hard to find the right word when I didn't even know where to start. Some apps were too advanced, and I quickly got frustrated. Others were too simple, and I felt like I wasn't learning enough. It was hard to find that balance. Then there was the difficulty with understanding new words. English is full of words that sound the same but mean different things. I remember hearing words like right and getting so confused. How could two words that sound exactly the same mean something so different? And don't even get me started on words that are spelled the same, but pronounced differently, like read and read. Every time I learned a new word, I felt like I was unlocking a small part of the language. But there were always more words, more rules, and more exceptions to learn. Listening was tough too. When I watched English movies or listened to people speaking, they talked so fast. I could pick up a few words here and there, but by the time I figured out one word, they had already said three more. It felt like I was always behind, always trying to catch up. And when they used idioms or expressions that didn't make sense literally, I felt completely lost. Despite all these challenges, I knew one thing: I wasn't going to give up. I reminded myself that learning a new language is supposed to be hard. It's normal to feel confused in the beginning, and it's okay to make mistakes. Every time I felt frustrated, I told myself, this is part of the process. Every challenge is a step forward. Slowly, I began to see that even the smallest progress, like learning a new word or understanding a sentence, was worth celebrating. I just had to keep going, one day at a time. Once I decided to start learning English, I knew I had to begin somewhere simple. So I started with basic vocabulary and simple phrases, words and sentences I could use in everyday life. Hello, thank you, how are you, were some of the first things I learned. They were small, easy steps, but they made me feel like I was finally making progress. Knowing how to greet someone or ask a simple question was like opening the door to understanding the language. I realized early on that learning a new language isn't about big leaps. It's about consistency, about doing a little bit every day. If I studied just for a few minutes every day, I would make steady progress. I set a small goal for myself: to learn 5 new words each day. At first, it seemed like nothing, but as the days passed, those 5 words began to add up. Slowly but surely, my vocabulary grew, and I started recognizing more words in the things I was reading or listening to. I also practiced repeating phrases I would use in real-life situations. For example, when I learned how to say, "Where is the bus stop?" or "How much does this cost?" I would say them out loud several times until they became familiar to me. Practicing speaking made me feel more comfortable with the words, even if I was only saying them to myself. It helped me get used to the sounds and rhythm of the language. To help with my learning, I turned to some basic tools. A simple dictionary became my best friend. Anytime I didn't know a word, I would look it up, write it down, and practice using it in a sentence. At first, I was only able to use the words in short, simple sentences. But as time went on, I found myself forming more complete thoughts. Another tool that helped me a lot was a beginner's English book. The book was full of simple stories and dialogues, the kind you would use in everyday life. I started reading one story each day, making sure to focus on understanding every word. If I didn't understand something, I would go back and reread it. The stories were short, so they didn't feel overwhelming, and they gave me confidence that I could understand English piece by piece. Online resources became a key part of my routine as well. I found YouTube channels that were made for people like me, beginners learning English. These channels had videos on basic grammar, everyday phrases, and pronunciation tips. Some of the videos even had subtitles in my native language, which helped me follow along. The more I watched, the more comfortable I became with the sounds of English. I also started using language learning apps, where I could practice vocabulary, do quick quizzes, and track my progress. Every day, I made sure to set aside a bit of time for English. Whether it was in the morning before I started my day or at night before going to sleep, I made sure to keep it consistent. Some days, I only had a few minutes to spare, but I didn't let that stop me. Even those few minutes were valuable. Learning a language is like exercising a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. The key to learning was not trying to rush the process. I knew that I couldn't learn everything at once, and that was okay. Little by little, I was building a foundation. The more I practiced, the more confident I became. I understood that it was okay if I didn't remember every word right away, and it was fine to make mistakes. The important thing was that I was learning and improving, even if the progress felt slow. With each new word and phrase I learned, I felt more motivated. I could see myself getting better, and that pushed me to keep going. Learning English was no longer something that scared me. It was something that excited me. It wasn't just about knowing words. It was about gaining a new skill that would help me in my life. I was starting to see English not as a challenge, but as an adventure, and I was eager to continue. After getting comfortable with some basic vocabulary, I knew I had to start practicing my listening and speaking skills. Learning English isn't just about knowing words. It's about being able to hear and understand how they're used, and then say them correctly. That's when I decided to try listening to English as much as I could. I started by listening to English podcasts. At first, it was hard. The speakers talked fast, and I couldn't catch every word. But I didn't let that discourage me. I found podcasts that were made for beginners, where the hosts spoke slowly and used simple words. I would listen to these podcasts every day, even if I didn't understand everything. I noticed that the more I listened, the more I got used to the rhythm of the language. I started picking up new words and phrases just by hearing them over and over again. Watching English shows with subtitles also became part of my daily routine. I found that seeing the words on the screen while hearing them helped me connect how they were pronounced. I would watch a show and repeat the sentences out loud, trying to mimic the way the actors spoke. Sometimes I would pause the show, repeat the line, and then play it again to see if I got it right. This not only helped me understand how sentences flowed, but also made me more confident in speaking out loud. That's when I discovered something called shadowing. Shadowing is when you listen to a native speaker and try to repeat what they say right after you hear it. It's like being an echo. At first, it was tough to keep up with native speakers, but with practice, I got better. I would pick short clips from podcasts or shows, listen to a sentence, and then say it immediately after, imitating the pronunciation, tone, and speed of the speaker. It was a fun way to improve my pronunciation and sound more natural when speaking English. I didn't worry about making mistakes. Shadowing wasn't about being perfect. It was about getting used to the language in real time. Little by little, I could feel my speaking and listening skills improving. It wasn't always easy, but with consistent practice, I started understanding more and speaking more fluently. The fear of speaking out loud started to fade, and I found myself enjoying the process of listening and repeating, knowing that each time I was getting a little bit better. Alongside practicing listening and speaking, I knew I had to focus on reading and writing too. To build up my reading skills, I started with short, simple texts. At first, I chose children's books because the language was easy and the sentences were short. The stories were fun, and because they were simple, I didn't feel overwhelmed. As I read each page, I made sure to understand every word, looking up new vocabulary in my dictionary when I needed to. Next, I moved on to reading blog posts and short stories. There are so many blogs online that are written in clear, simple English, which was perfect for me as a beginner. I would read one post a day, focusing on understanding the meaning behind the words. Some blog posts were about travel, others about food, and some about learning English, which was really helpful. Reading these small texts every day made a big difference in my understanding of sentence structure and grammar. I was beginning to see how words fit together to make more complex sentences. Writing, on the other hand, was a little more challenging for me at first, but I knew it was an important part of the process. So, I decided to start small. Each day, I wrote 1 or 2 sentences in a notebook. At first, they were very basic. Today, I went to the store, or I like reading English books. But as I got more comfortable, I started writing longer sentences and even short paragraphs. Writing every day helped me to see the patterns in the language. I started noticing things like how verbs change with time, or how different words connect in a sentence. I didn't worry too much about grammar mistakes at first. I just focused on getting my ideas down in English. Over time, I found that my grammar was improving naturally as I wrote more. One thing that really helped me improve my writing was reviewing what I had written. After writing a few sentences, I would go back and check if everything made sense. If I wasn't sure about something, I would look it up, learn the correct way to say it, and then rewrite the sentence. It was a slow process, but it helped me understand English grammar better. As I continued reading and writing every day, I started to notice improvements in my overall understanding of the language. Reading made me more familiar with new words and sentence structures, while writing gave me the chance to practice using what I had learned. Bit by bit, I was building my English skills, and I felt proud of the progress I was making. Once I had built up some basic skills in listening, speaking, reading, and writing, I realized that the best way to truly improve was to use English as much as possible in my daily life. I knew that learning in a classroom or through apps was only part of the journey. To really get comfortable with the language, I had to start applying it in real situations. This idea excited me, but it also made me a bit nervous. What if I said something wrong? What if people didn't understand me? But I reminded myself that making mistakes was just part of the learning process, and I decided to give it a try. At first, I practiced by talking to myself. It might sound silly, but it was a great way to get used to speaking English without the pressure of someone listening. I would have little conversations with myself throughout the day. For example, when I was getting ready in the morning, I would say out loud, "I'm going to brush my teeth now," or "I need to make breakfast." These were simple sentences, but they helped me get comfortable with forming thoughts in English. As I went about my day, I kept narrating what I was doing. I'm going to the store, or I'm going to read my book now. It was a small habit, but over time, it made a big difference. Speaking English became less intimidating, and it started to feel more natural. Soon, I began looking for chances to use English with other people. I was lucky to have a few friends who were also learning English, so we decided to practice together. We would have short conversations in English, starting with easy topics like, "How was your day?" or "What did you eat for lunch?" In the beginning, we made a lot of mistakes, but we didn't mind. The important thing was that we were trying. Sometimes, when we didn't know how to say something in English, we would look it up together, learn the new word, and keep the conversation going. These little chats helped me build confidence and made speaking English feel less like a task and more like a fun way to connect with others. I also started using English in small, everyday situations. One day, I decided to challenge myself by writing short messages in English. Instead of texting my friends in my native language, I would write simple sentences in English. "Hello, how are you?" Or "What time will we meet?" These were basic messages, but they gave me the chance to practice without feeling overwhelmed. I noticed that the more I wrote, the quicker and more natural it became. Soon, I wasn't just writing short messages, I was writing entire paragraphs, explaining my day or making plans for the weekend, all in English. Using English when ordering food was another way I challenged myself. Whenever I went to a restaurant or cafe, I tried to speak in English. I would ask the waiter for a coffee with milk or a sandwich, please. At first, I was nervous. I worried about mispronouncing words or not being understood, but I soon realized that people were patient with me. Even if I made a mistake, they knew what I meant and would help me by repeating the correct phrase or giving me a friendly smile. Each time I ordered something in English, my confidence grew. It became easier to speak up, and I even started using English to ask questions like, "Can I have the menu?" or "Do you have any vegetarian options?" One of the most exciting moments came when I had the opportunity to travel. I decided that during my trip I would use English as much as possible. When I arrived at the airport, I spoke to the staff in English, asking for directions or help with my luggage. At the hotel, I checked in using English, and when I went out to explore the city, I asked for directions in English as well. "Excuse me, can you tell me where the nearest bus stop is?" Or, "How far is the museum from here?" These questions were simple, but each time I successfully communicated with someone, I felt a sense of accomplishment. It was proof that all my studying and practice were paying off. I wasn't just learning English anymore, I was living it. There were moments, of course, when I struggled. Sometimes I couldn't find the right words, or I would forget how to say something. But instead of feeling discouraged, I used those moments as opportunities to learn. If I didn't know how to say a word, I would ask, or I would take a note and look it up later. Every mistake was a lesson, and I began to see that the more I used English in real life, the better I became. Using English in my daily life made the language feel more natural to me. It wasn't just something I was studying in a book. It was something I could use in real situations, whether I was talking to friends, ordering food, or traveling. The more I used it, the more confident I became, and the more excited I was to keep learning. English was no longer just a foreign language to me. It was becoming part of my everyday life, and I was proud of how far I had come. Learning a new language is a long journey, and there were times when I felt tired or discouraged, but I knew that if I wanted to succeed, I had to stay motivated. One of the best ways I found to keep myself on track was by setting small, realistic goals. Instead of trying to learn everything at once, I decided to focus on simple, daily tasks that I knew I could achieve. For example, one of my main goals was to learn 5 new English words every day. It didn't sound like much, but it was manageable, and that was the point. I would choose words that were useful to me, words I could use in conversations, or words I had come across in my reading or listening practice. I would write the words down in a notebook, along with their meanings and a simple sentence using each one. I reviewed them throughout the day, repeating them to myself until they became familiar. As the days went by, I noticed that these small daily goals were adding up. My vocabulary was growing, and I was beginning to use the new words naturally in my conversations. Another goal I set for myself was to watch at least one short video in English every day, whether it was a tutorial, a podcast, or an episode of a show. These small, daily habits kept me engaged and made learning feel less overwhelming. Some days, I had more time and energy to study, and on those days, I would push myself a little further. But on days when I felt tired or busy, I still made sure to do something, even if it was just a few minutes of practice. By staying consistent, I was able to keep my motivation high. Celebrating small achievements was another key to staying motivated. Whenever I hit a milestone, no matter how small, I took a moment to recognize it. The first time I understood a full conversation in English was a huge win for me. I was watching a YouTube video, and suddenly I realized that I could follow along without needing to stop and translate every word. It felt amazing to see how far I had come since those early days of struggling with basic vocabulary. Another achievement I was proud of was finishing my first English book. It wasn't a long book. It was a short story meant for beginners, but I remember the feeling of accomplishment when I turned the last page. I had read the whole thing in English, understanding the story without having to translate it into my native language. That moment showed me how much I had improved, and it gave me the confidence to keep going. I also celebrated small victories in my speaking practice. For example, the first time I had a conversation in English with someone and didn't feel nervous, I knew I had made real progress. I wasn't perfect, and I still made mistakes, but I was able to express myself and understand the other person without panicking. It felt like a huge step forward, and it motivated me to keep practicing. Whenever I reached one of these milestones, I would treat myself in some way. Sometimes it was something small, like taking a break and watching my favorite show or rewarding myself with a nice meal. Other times, I would celebrate by setting a new challenge for myself, like trying to read a more difficult book or having a longer conversation in English. These celebrations reminded me that learning English was a journey, and every step forward was worth recognizing. I also found motivation in the reasons I had started learning English in the first place. Whenever I felt like giving up, I reminded myself why I was doing this. Whether it was for a better job, the ability to travel more easily, or simply for personal growth, these goals kept me going. I imagined how great it would feel to be able to speak English fluently, to have conversations without hesitation, or to watch a movie without subtitles. That vision of my future self was a powerful motivator, and it helped me push through the tough days. Staying motivated wasn't always easy, but by setting small, achievable goals and celebrating my progress along the way, I was able to keep going. Each little victory, whether it was learning a new word or finishing a book, brought me one step closer to my goal of mastering English, and with each step, I became more confident, more excited, and more determined to keep improving. As much as I tried to stay motivated, there were days when learning English felt like an uphill battle. Progress wasn't always as fast as I wanted it to be, and sometimes it felt like I wasn't moving forward at all. One of the hardest moments was when I realized that, even after months of studying, I still couldn't understand everything I heard in English. I would listen to native speakers and feel overwhelmed by how fast they talked, how easily they used expressions I didn't know, and how natural the language seemed to them. It was frustrating to think that despite all my hard work, I was still struggling. There were times when I felt like giving up. I remember one particular day when I was practicing listening to an English podcast, and it seemed like every word went over my head. I couldn't follow the conversation, and no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't keep up. I paused the podcast, feeling defeated. What's the point? I thought. I'll never be able to understand English like that. But after taking a break and calming down, I reminded myself that learning any new skill takes time. No one becomes fluent overnight, and setbacks are part of the process. I had to be patient with myself. Progress might feel slow, but that didn't mean it wasn't happening. I looked back at how far I had come since I first started. Months ago, I couldn't even introduce myself in English. Now I could have simple conversations, understand basic texts, and even enjoy English shows with subtitles. That was real progress, even if it didn't always feel like it. I realized that persistence was the key to overcoming these obstacles. I couldn't let frustration stop me from continuing. Instead of focusing on what I couldn't do yet, I decided to focus on what I could do and keep pushing forward. The next day, I went back to that same podcast. This time, I listened to a shorter segment and gave myself permission to pause and replay as much as I needed. I might not have understood every word, but I understood more than I had the day before, and that was enough. Another challenge I faced was when I hit a plateau in my learning. For a while, it felt like I wasn't improving at all, no matter how much I studied. My speaking skills weren't getting any better, and I kept making the same mistakes with grammar. It was frustrating because I was putting in the effort, but the results weren't showing. I knew that this was a common problem for language learners, but that didn't make it any less discouraging. Again, persistence became my best friend. I reminded myself that progress doesn't always happen in big leaps. It often happens in small, subtle ways. Even if I didn't notice it right away, every day that I practiced was bringing me closer to my goal. I decided to change up my study routine to make things more interesting. Instead of doing the same exercises every day, I started trying new methods. I practiced with different apps, watched new kinds of videos, and even tried writing short stories in English. These changes helped me break through the plateau and reminded me that learning can still be fun, even during tough times. There were also days when I felt embarrassed about my mistakes, like the time I tried to have a conversation with someone in English, but I mixed up words and ended up saying something completely wrong. The person I was talking to laughed, and even though they didn't mean it in a bad way, I felt embarrassed. I wanted to stop speaking English altogether after that. I kept replaying the moment in my head, wishing I could have done better. But then I reminded myself that mistakes are a natural part of learning. Everyone makes them, especially when learning something new. Instead of letting that moment discourage me, I used it as motivation to improve. I looked up the words I had mixed up, practiced them, and promised myself that the next time I had a conversation, I would be more prepared. I also learned to laugh at my mistakes instead of feeling ashamed. After all, making mistakes meant I was trying, and trying was the only way I was going to get better. Each obstacle I faced taught me something valuable. Setbacks weren't a sign that I was failing, they were part of the journey. Every time I felt like I wasn't making progress, I reminded myself to keep going, to keep pushing through. Learning English wasn't going to be easy, but with persistence, I knew I could overcome any challenge that came my way. Slowly but surely, I was moving forward, and that was what mattered most. After months of dedication and practice, I finally started to feel the change. English no longer seemed like a foreign language that I was struggling to understand. It became something I could use and enjoy in my daily life. I noticed how much more confident I felt when speaking. I wasn't afraid to make mistakes anymore. I knew that I could carry on a conversation without hesitating or feeling embarrassed. My understanding had also improved significantly. I could watch English movies and shows without subtitles, follow along with podcasts, and even understand the news in English. Each of these small victories made me realize how far I had come. One of the moments that really made me proud was when I had a conversation with a native English speaker, and for the first time, I didn't need to pause or search for words. The conversation flowed naturally, and I understood everything they said. It was a simple chat, but it made me feel like all my hard work had finally paid off. I had gone from being a beginner, nervous and unsure, to someone who could use English comfortably in real-life situations. It was a journey filled with challenges, but each one had made me stronger and more determined. Now, looking back, I see that learning English wasn't just about mastering grammar rules or memorizing vocabulary. It was about building confidence, staying motivated, and pushing through the difficult moments. I didn't become fluent overnight, and there were times when I wanted to give up. But by practicing a little every day, setting small goals, and celebrating every bit of progress, I made it. I reached a point where English became part of my life, and I'm still learning and growing every day.